Yeti!
After 2019 proved to be one of the most frustrating years in SMG4 history, hopes were not high for 2020. The New Year's video did have some heartwarming moments, but the distinct focus on Human Maggie's character arc near the end just didn't feel right. It looked like things couldn't get any worse, but that only meant there was nowhere to go but up. 2020 saw an increase in quality from the last year. At their worst, the videos were just forgettable, but at their best, they were refreshingly hilarious. Maggie's Destiny was a nice palate cleanser, and with the Human Maggie character arc finally out of the way, fans were far more interested in the next big story arc. Would it develop the SMG4 universe, or develop another character? Would it contest the greatness of the Waluigi arc, or completely fall flat like the anime arc? Would it finally bring the fanbase together, or would it only split them further apart? All of these questions would be answered in 2020's YouTube arc.
Okay, enough!
This arc was pretty good. Even though it doesn't stand out quite as much as other arcs, it's got plenty of good qualities to appreciate. The comedy is on point, the pacing is solid, and the storytelling is engaging throughout. Over the course of 2020, it's clear that they were starting to figure out what did and didn't work about modern SMG4. Funnily enough, looking back at the past is also a recurring element in the arc's story, and it all starts with the return of SMG4's very first villain. SMG3 has never been taken too seriously in this series. He's always been your typical cartoon villain. He has all sorts of crazy plans, but they all fall through in comical ways. However, being the villain of an arc comes with some high expectations, and SMG3 delivers on all fronts. His motivation is simple, yet sensible, and his scheme is far more threatening than any that came before. He devises a plot not just to destroy SMG4, but to erase him and his friends. Except Mario. Even SMG3 knows good clickbait when he sees it. This scheme is thought out much better than usual, and it comes so close to succeeding that his banishment was just as much necessary as it was poetic. You see, SMG3's plan is made up of 3 major threads, all of which are vitally important to the story. The first of these threads is the anti-cast, the supposed counterparts to SMG4's friends, and the intended substitutes for the main characters. The second thread is the internet graveyard, the home for all dead memes, and the place in which SMG3 intends to dispose of SMG4 and his friends. The third and central thread is the YouTube remote, the tool that gives Susan a lot of her power, and the means by which characters are forced into the internet graveyard. These threads are woven nicely together into one strong cord, and had SMG3 sent Mario back into the internet graveyard with the rest of his friends, his plan would have worked flawlessly. Individually, all of these threads make for good additions to the story, but one of them is definitely weaker than the others. The anti-cast serves its purpose in this arc. They're not especially entertaining on their own, but that's actually a good thing in this context. They're not supposed to be suitable replacements for the originals, and SMG3 realizes this very quickly. In that sense, they succeeded, but it was obvious after a few episodes that they wouldn't be able to keep up with the main cast. As such, it wasn't long before they all faded into obscurity, with one exception. Let's talk about Melanie for a second. During the YouTube arc, she was literally just a watermelon with Maggie's old headgear. Her whole joke was that she sits around and sometimes falls over. She also has an affinity for hacking, an ability which actually carried over into future episodes. However, neither of these things define her today, because one day, Melanie changed in a way that let everyone know she wasn't going anywhere. In Mario's Mask Madness, a fierce deity mask falls onto her face, and she proves herself to be an even more fitting counterpart to Maggie by being turned into a human against her will. With a new cutesy design, Melanie slowly transitioned from a running gag to a main character. The fierce deity mask gave her new abilities, the writers gave her more of a personality, and she gave Axel a little taste of romance. I'll admit, I didn't have high hopes for the character after she became human, but over time, she's become one of my favorites. Besides Melanie, the anti-cast wasn't as good as the writers might have hoped, and quickly overstayed their welcome once the YouTube arc ended. It wouldn't be surprising to me if they were to show up into the internet graveyard with little fanfare. Speaking of which, the other two threads of the YouTube arc are much stronger, and they help paint a picture of the series that's never been seen before. The YouTube remote and the internet graveyard add a whole new dimension to the series, and they both play with real-life concepts as they apply to SMG4's universe. The YouTube remote is specifically designed around the functions of the website, some of which are more useful than others. The internet graveyard is a representation of internet trends of old. They're directly connected by a single button on the remote, which could be taken to represent the YouTube algorithm's stranglehold on the... One of the key plot points is that the actual YouTube videos in which these characters first appeared are being directly altered and affecting the present. How does this all work? If SMG4 is connected to the real world, how connected is it? Does that one sponsorship segment actually clue us into anything? If so, what does that imply about the other characters? These are pretty daunting questions to answer, and for the purposes of the arc's plot, they're far less than necessary to answer. It makes enough sense in universe that you can suspend your disbelief a little bit. Regardless, if you ignore the broader implications of a world that heavily leans on the fourth wall, the internet graveyard and the YouTube remote are creative additions to the series that add a whole new layer of depth to its universe. Alright buddy, can't fool us. Surely you don't think this arc is perfect? Well, there is a weak point in the YouTube arc, and it is a crucial point. The end of Deleted is a fairly convincing plot twist. Obviously, more jaded fans like me would never believe it for a second. But at the time of its release, people were legitimately convinced that the cast we once knew and at least tolerated might be gone forever. And not even one full episode went by before it was revealed that everyone was fine, instantly draining the moment of any emotional impact it once had. If I had to guess, I'd say they didn't want to risk being too emotional after the mixed reception of the anime arc. And ironically, they missed a huge opportunity to capitalize on a moment that could have been genuinely impactful. Imagine if the concept of the anti-cast episode were stretched out to a full length, maybe even having Mario reluctantly make videos with SMG3. Then in the next episode, Mario would start trying to find ways to save them, which could be a good setup for jokes, or at least for something, and just when you might have had the skeptics convinced that they were gone, you finally reveal that the characters really were alive all along. With some more planning, or even just more time, this could have easily been ironed out. But as it stands, instead of letting the tension build as much as reasonably possible, it takes a nosedive far too early and kills the suspense of the plot twist before it could reach its full potential. Furthermore, how is Mario able to re-upload all of those videos from the phone? Did SMG4 conveniently have backups of those exact videos on his phone? Surely he doesn't have every video he's ever made stored in there. Okay, I know I just talked about suspension of disbelief, but this doesn't even make sense in context. I guess they had to get out somehow, but what about SMG4's computer? It wouldn't be unreasonable to back up important videos on a device with much more storage. And even if that were all handled better, the implementation of WATFI feels really strange. The spirit of the remote? Why? Not even how, just why? This may be the only part of the arc that I find a huge issue with, but it's a significant issue nonetheless. Things pick up for the better after the Watfi challenges conclude. During the rap battle, Human Meggy is given her new voice, permanently. It was unexpected, yet it felt inevitable. It was the only thing about her left to change before Splatoon would be completely purged from her identity. However, I don't find a problem with this moment for one key reason. It was written well. Changing someone's spoken language was already an established ability of the remote. It was even used on Human Meggy earlier in the arc. There's also not an emotional character arc surrounding it, which is arguably more important considering what Meggy's transformation put us through. It happens seamlessly with little fanfare, and I appreciate that. What I don't appreciate is this line from Psycho, and while I think the complete reason would be better left to its own video, suffice it to say, it feels like the writers were sick of people criticizing Human Meggy and wanted to use Psycho as a mouthpiece to try to shut them up. Despite that little grievance, the ending of the YouTube arc still proves to be an entertaining and satisfying conclusion. It's just a shame we'd never see SMG4 again. At least, not until a year later. In conclusion, the YouTube arc is a lot of fun to watch, with SMG4 as the main villain and the YouTube remote and internet graveyard as the creative catalysts for the entire plot. It's clear that SMG4 has learned from the failures of the anime arc along with the latter half of 2019 and determined to improve for the better. Sure, sometimes I miss the old days of SMG4, when things were a lot simpler, jokes were a lot riskier, and YouTube in general was a much better place to be. But modern content can still have plenty of merit on its own. It takes some more digging than it used to, but you can still find plenty of great stuff on YouTube, and you don't have to long for a present of the past.